Welcome to the sixth and final installment of our webinar series, Instructional Strategies for Teaching Reading Foundational Skills. This particular episode will focus on shared writing and interactive writing in service to systematic and explicit foundational reading skills instruction. I'm Barb Novak, and I'm joined by my colleague, Laura Adams. If you want to give a shout out, Laura.
Sure thing. Good afternoon, Wisconsin colleagues.
The objectives for this overall webinar series are what appear on your screen now. The biggest objective being to understand the role of explicit and systematic phonics instruction in learning to read. And here are the specific objectives for session 6. We are focusing on interactive writing and shared writing. We'll take a look at where that strategy is included within the Foundational Reading Skills tool, which is a self-assessment or self-evaluation. Then we'll go into the details of interactive writing, talking about the definition, the skills that can be taught within interactive writing, and possible instructional procedures and routine. And we will finish by, and really overall throughout the webinar, continue to talk about how this particular strategy fits within the larger gradual release of responsibility instructional model, with the ultimate goal being transferring skills into reading and writing events or reading and writing behaviors. This is the link for the materials, most of those being slide decks. That's what the top link is. The bottom link has the slide decks and the recordings of the webinars up through session 5. Session 6 should be posted by the end of March. These are our previous webinars. The first webinar, I think there might be a temptation to skip it, but it's really critical. It's where we explain the Foundational Reading Skills tool, which is a self-assessment tool. And then we go into the specifics of there's a webinar missing on here. We go into the specifics of phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. Then webinar 4 is actually about alphabetic principle and phonics. Webinar 5 is shared reading, and webinar 6 is interactive and shared writing, which is where we are tonight. Our webinar series has these guiding principles. Success comes from an intentional system, both at the classroom level and at the school level and at the district level. And that classroom practices are supported by strategic use of data, collaboration, and structures within the school and district. Another of our guiding principles is that foundational skills are one part of reading, and that comprehension results from fluency in context, language comprehension, and strategic knowledge. And we'll show you another image of that in just a minute. And that foundational skills are developed through explicit and systematic instruction. So instruction is systematic when it follows a predictable or intentional scope and sequence. It's explicit when there's a clear and memorable model, followed by guided practice with feedback, and the use of really precise language on the part of the teacher or teachers that enable the student to complete the task successfully. And the ultimate goal of that explicit and systematic instruction is the application of skills and strategies consistently and correctly in independent practice. So reading comprehension, as I said earlier, is the result of fluency in context, language comprehension, and strategic knowledge, and it's supported by metacognition, interest in relevancy, choice and access, and social emotional learning. So in this webinar series, we are pretty artificially pulling out the skills that lead to fluency in context. It's important to always remember that we are talking about one part of reading and literacy instruction that takes place over a relatively small amount of time in a student's development, and actually through a relatively small amount of time on pretty close to a daily basis. So it's really critical that those small pieces of time are really intentional in order to really intentionally planned and delivered in order to truly benefit the student. So we do want to continually remind you that this is one part of what it means to create and foster a reader. So at this point, if we had more than an hour with you, or if you were watching this as a recording, we do encourage you to pause at these thinking points throughout the slide deck and take some time to journal for yourself or draw for yourself or talk to your colleagues about the questions that you see on the screen.
So you can see here our agenda for our shared time together. And the first piece that we're going to really dive into is understanding the purpose and the instructional routine of interactive writing. We know that writing is an intricate process and especially challenging for novice and emergent writers to master. And just a reminder that most kindergarten students are classified as emergent or novice writers. And they do understand that messages can be written to express meaning and that others can read their messages, but they have to hold so much information in their minds at once. They need to balance graphomotor, linguistic, and cognitive demands of the task. They need to learn how to manage concepts about print and conventions in order to actually engage in the writing process. And so, even though writing is complex, or especially because it's complex, it's important for teachers to understand how to implement effective writing instruction. And interactive writing could be an effective instructional tool or an effective instructional practice to positively affect early writing achievement. So you can see here that we have several different approaches to writing. And we have first just the language experience, where the teacher demonstrates by scribing for students. And this is typically exact words, freeing them to express their meanings in oral language without having to concern themselves with the mechanics involved in writing. Next, we have shared writing and interactive writing, and it's really important to differentiate between those two writing activities. You can see here that shared writing is where the teacher is acting as the scribe, emphasizing the composition process, co-constructing the text that children can read later. And the big difference is that interactive writing is the place where we're sharing the pen, so to speak. So both shared writing and interactive writing are very intentional instructional practices. They need to be very carefully planned. The emphasis with interactive writing would be on composition and construction of the text. And the real difference, again, is really just that sharing the pen. And we'll get into that, of course, and more details about that in just a moment. And then finally, we have independent writing, where children are really working alone, using their current knowledge of the writing process to compose, construct their own texts. So what is interactive writing? It's an instructional practice specifically focused on the early phases of writing and has special relevance to our pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, grade 1, and grade 2 teachers and students. It should have a clear step-by-step format where teachers can use this instructional practice to teach a range of foundational literacy skills by sharing the pen with young writers. And so this specifically supports letter learning and formation, phonological and orthographic awareness, learning the nature of words, building a writing vocabulary, concepts about print, and organizing and composing narrative and expository text. Why would we engage in interactive writing? Besides some of those points about how it can help our novice and emerging readers solidify their reading skills, it also is in alignment with our vision for English language arts. We know that English language arts is an integrated discipline with reciprocal processes. So reading impacts writing and writing impacts reading. And we also believe that literacy, language, and meaning are socially constructed and enhanced by multiple perspectives. And in an interactive writing situation, we definitely have that social construction that's happening to support our the understandings that are being built by our youngest learners and helping them to extend that. So what are some purposes? There are many purposes for engaging in interactive writing, and these are three of the ones that we find most powerful. Increasing early literacy knowledge through an approach to writing text in an apprenticeship style. It has a focus on concepts about print, sound and letter correspondence, the use of high frequency words while composing a meaningful text within a supportive, risk-taking environment, really solidifying some of those skills for our young readers. And it's a powerful instructional approach to deliver explicit writing instruction. And again, really allowing for the transfer of skills, the transfer of strategic writing behaviors to students' own writing. This chart shows us some of the key features of interactive writing and some of the essential elements of interactive writing. And so we encourage you to pause and take a closer look and consider those. And if you're watching the recording, at this point, we would invite you to pause and think or talk with your colleagues or journal about these specific prompting questions here on the screen. Next, we're going to take just a short look about where we can find interactive writing within the Foundational Reading Skills tool. These are the 6 different components of the Foundational Reading Skills tool, and we will see interactive writing show up in part 1, instructional practices, and part 2, where we're talking about phonological processing. Specifically, we'll find it referenced in this particular chart where we are asking about concepts of print and the instruction to support development and solidifying concepts about print. And you can see here that it's listed on page 13, and it's also listed on page 25 of the tool itself as an instructional practice for integrating and coordinating those strategies. And next, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Barb to take us through a few more slides.
Thanks, Laura. We're going to look at a definition of interactive writing, think about skills that can be taught using interactive writing, and give you some instructional procedures and routines, most of which we'll ask you to explore on your own. So both Laura and I keep saying use interactive writing to teach skills. And I think we could refine our language there. Because when I say teach skills, I usually think about explicit instruction that might come in the form of a mini lesson. And I think of interactive writing and shared writing, one of the primary uses as being a way to follow up on the skills that are explicitly taught during mini lessons, really, especially when we're talking about foundational reading skills. So you might introduce a phonemic awareness skill, like blending or segmenting, and then in an explicit instruction, and then you might revisit it later in the day or later in the week through a shared writing lesson, the same way that you might through a shared reading lesson. So we're engaging in shared writing, interactive writing, and a portion of that can be guided writing, with the overall goal of students independently applying what we're talking about in their writing. So this is that gradual release idea again. So there's a common experience through something like phonics and word study. We revisit that concept through interactive writing, which includes some collaborative practice and then students might apply it independently during a time like a literacy center or independent reading and writing. So some of the benefits of interactive writing is that it allows us to demonstrate, because the teacher is the one doing the demonstrating, concepts about print, early writing strategies, and how words work. It can provide opportunities to hear sounds in words and connect sounds with letters. Again, a lesson that you teach explicitly as a mini lesson during word work time then becomes a concept that you can model during interactive writing. It helps children understand the relationship between encoding and decoding. So the same strategies that they're learning to figure out what words on the page say are the same strategies that they use to actually write or type words on their own page. So it reinforces that reciprocity. And it can increase spelling knowledge as well. You might not do all of those things in a single interactive writing lesson, but interactive writing as a whole is capable of doing these things. So the instructional routine starts with a common experience or a common, maybe even just a conversation, which you'll see in an example shortly. And then you approximate the message as a group. You practice what you want to say in writing. So you figure out how you would use words to say it. You practice it through talk. And then you actually start to apply it in writing. Sometimes that's the teacher doing the writing, and some teaching and practice while the teacher is writing. Sometimes the teacher and the student are sharing the pen, and that's also very carefully planned. And then the skills start to be applied in independent practice. So you prepare for interactive or shared writing by thinking about whether or not you want to do whole class instruction or whether you want to do small group based on similar needs. You select an instructional focus. There might be more than one that targets an identified need. And again, that instructional focus may parallel something else that you're working on in a reading mini lesson or other sorts of mini lessons. You think about the prior knowledge and experience of your students, which is especially important in constructing that shared experience. You think about how many lessons students might need. So the interactive or shared writing isn't one and done. Maybe there's a particularly complex skill that you want to keep coming back to in additional lessons. And then you think about the form that you want to use for your instructional focus, like the type of text that you might create, so that throughout the course of their time with you, students are really intentionally exposed to a wide variety of forms. In one of the examples today, you'll see students writing a letter. And that's one example of an appropriate kind of form that you can use in shared or interactive writing. And then you get your materials together. If you're in a face-to-face classroom, things like chart paper, markers, maybe picture prompts, maybe mentor text that you've already used, or anchor charts that you've already created so that you can build that connection to previous work and previous experiences. These are possible materials needed for instruction. And a few different kinds of interactive writing that you can do. You can do transcription, where you're reconstructing an existing text. And the example that you see over here for transcription is a nursery rhyme. You can do innovation, where you're taking a familiar text like row, row, row your boat and changing it slightly, innovating to create a text that's unique. Or you can do some kind of negotiation where you're doing an original composition, which is what you'll see in the next example. Here's some more about formats. It could be a few sentences that form a short story. It could be a dialogue bubble that goes along with an image. Maybe you're writing a menu, a recipe, a response to a text, like a book review. Maybe you're retelling a text. Maybe you're writing a short narrative. Many of these are texts that students see in their lives outside of school, especially things like menus and recipes. So we're working sometimes with text formats that students are already familiar with, or other sorts of texts that students see around a school. So you start with a common experience and then you co-construct a message together. So the teacher has just a genuine and comfortable conversations with the students around a common experience. Or a story or a poem that you've read together or a text that you've read together. The teacher then records the message, like just somewhere right at first where the students can't see it, while the students rehearse the message orally. And then the teacher makes a decision based on the student's spelling development, which words and letters they've already worked on. The teacher makes an on-the-spot decision. If we're doing negotiation where we're writing an original composition, the teacher makes an on-the-spot decision about which words or which sounds in the shared composition would really be worthwhile to focus on at this time. If you're using a transcription or an innovation, you may be able to plan more of that ahead of time. So then you write the message together. This engages the students in sharing the responsibility of writing the message when you're actually engaging in sharing the pen. And sharing the pen just means I guess right now it means you wipe the pen down with some kind of sanitizer, or the kid has their own pen and then they use the pen on the chart, or they use the pen on the shared Jamboard, which we'll see in just a bit. So you're physically sharing the act of writing in a way that's, I guess, COVID safe. And the teacher is modeling, and in some cases, the teacher can be modeling and encouraging students to actually use their whiteboards to follow along. Maybe follow along with the whole message, or maybe follow along with key words and phrases. It's a way to increase motivation and engagement. Then you prompt the students to apply writing and spelling strategies. You scaffold as you need to, and then you rewrite the message with students to check on meaning, language, and spelling accuracy. So it could be the teacher at the chart writing things down as the students are following along on their whiteboards. It could be the teacher at the chart sharing the pen while other students are following along on their whiteboards. In some cases, it might just be the teacher at the chart with the pen, which is you'll see some examples of that today too. And then after you co-construct the message, you can go through sort of a checklist process to reflect on what you did. You could think of this as really reviewing the learning targets and going back to look at the piece of writing to think about whether your message was really sent and what skills and strategies you used as a writer. And then you can certainly, as you send students off to practice independently, that helps prompt them as to what sort of things they can be doing and practicing. So let's look at an example in a virtual setting. This whole video is quite lengthy, so we're just going to show you the lesson, but I do encourage you to go back and watch the professional things that happened before and after the lesson.
With a group of 3 children, a kindergartner and 2 first graders. Great. So here I am, and I'm so lucky today to have 3 children with me to do some writing. I have AJ. AJ, can you wave? Okay. And I have Brianna. Brianna, can you wave? And then I have Leah. Leah, can you wave? Yay, thank you so much for the 3 of you for being with me today. We're going to do some writing together using Google Jamboard. And yay! All right, so I have an idea about something that we could write, and it's a little bit of a sad story. So I'm going to tell you the sad story first, okay? The sad story is that my partner Dave, I'm married to him, Dave cut his finger. His pinky finger. Can you show me your pinky finger? You have pinky fingers too, right? He cut his pinky finger really badly, and it hurts. And he wants it to get better because he's getting kind of tired of always having a bandage on it. I'm going to show you what his finger looks like right now. You see that there? See that giant bandage on his pinky finger? And it hurts? It's kind of sad, isn't it? And so I thought it would be nice if we could just write him a little note to try to make him feel better about his pinky. What do you think about that idea? And then I'll give him the note. Does that sound okay? Okay, so AJ, can you tell me, do you have any ideas about what we could say to try to make Dave feel better about his cut pinky finger? What do you think we could say to make him feel better?
We hope you feel better. It's okay.
It's okay? It's going to be okay? And we hope you feel better? Those are good ideas. Brianna, do you have some ideas about what we could say to make Dave feel better?
Yes.
What do you think you might say?
You might say, What?
Well, AJ had a couple different ideas. Let me share a couple of his ideas and see what you think might work well. He said maybe we could say we hope you feel better, or maybe we could say it's going to be okay. What do you think?
It might be okay.
That might be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you think, Leah? What would you like to say to Dave about his hurt finger?
It's probably gonna get better. I've had I read everyone writing this note has had cuts, and it hurts a lot.
Okay, it's probably going to get better. So that and everybody, all of you've had cuts on your pinky fingers before, haven't you? All right. Yes.
One time I smashed my finger. My sister smashed my finger.
Oh, ouch.
With a big rock.
That sounds like it would really hurt. Did it get better?
It was on my pinky finger.
It was your pinky finger, the same as Dave. Brianna, have you ever had a cut or ever hurt yourself?
Lots of blood.
Oh, lots of blood. Yikes. Let's hear it, Brianna.
I was sliding a piece of paper on my pinky finger, but I accidentally got a cut.
And did it get better?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, you've all had cuts or owies on your fingers that have gotten better. And so I think that it's a great idea for us to tell Dave that. So let's all go into our Jamboard now. Can you all go into Jamboard, our Jamboard? And if we're writing a note or a letter to somebody, sometimes we start a certain way. We sometimes start saying, Dear Dave, we would say. Okay, so we'll start with the word dear. Should I start writing, let's see. Do you think I should start writing down here? Would down here be a good place for me to start writing Dear Dave? So let's start by figuring out what letter we're going to write first. So the word is dear. Can you all say dear?
Dear.
Can you say dear? Yeah. And how about you, Brianna? Can you say dear?
Dear.
Dear. And what sound, can you make the sound you hear at the beginning of dear? Dear.
D.
I heard somebody say D. We hear the D sound and we use the letter D for that sound. That's right. So AJ, I'm going to ask you to be the first writer. Can you please make a letter D at the top of the paper? Can you write a D? Oh, I see the line straight down. That's the beginning of the D. There you go. D. All right. And then I'm going to write the next couple of letters in the word. The next couple of letters. Whoops, I've got the wrong. And now let's listen for the last sound we hear in the word dear. 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 Can you make the sound you're hearing? Dear. Everybody say the dr. Yeah, that's right. It's the r sound, and we use the letter R for that sound. Leah, could you put an R where it goes up there on the paper?
Wait a minute.
There you go. That's right. So you put the letter R. All right. So now we have to leave a space right here. We're going to leave a space right here. And then we're going to write the first letter of Dave's name because we're writing Dear Dave. So that's going to be Brianna's turn. Brianna, can you make a D somewhere after this red mark? Because I'm putting a space here between the words. So after that red mark, could you make a D? Your D is going to look just like this D. Can you make a D after the red mark? You know what? I can kind of help you a little bit get it started.
I don't see it.
So I made some dashed lines on your Jamboard and you can trace over them to make your D.
Me? Mommy?
Yep. That's Brianna. Very nice, Brianna. That's the first letter in Dave's name, Dear Dave. And I'll write the rest. Dear Dave. So now we've written Dear Dave, and you said you were going to say, it will be okay. That was something that each of you said something about his finger will be okay, right? So
I said that.
you said that. You sure did, Brianna. You said it would be okay just like your cut was okay. And Leah thought that it would probably be okay or might be okay. And AJ thought it might just like his finger was okay. So we're going to say the sentence, it will be okay. Can you all say that with me? Ready? It will be okay. Let's say it again. It will be okay. All right, now we're going to count how many words are in that sentence. Are you ready? Ready? It will be okay. Now, okay is just one word. Let's do it again. Ready? It will be okay. So how many words did you count there? Can you hold up your fingers for how many words you think you have? Brianna's holding up 4 fingers. That's what I think too. And AJ's holding up 4 fingers. And Leah is. We're all in agreement that it's 4 words that we're going to write. Okay, so I'm going to go back over to our Jamboard. And we're going to do it will be okay. So in that interactive writing lesson, you saw several steps.
So now is the time for you to pause and think about the teaching points that you saw Dr. Duke use, Mrs. Duke, as the children called her. And what did you appreciate about the lesson? What do you think could have been improved? What questions do you have about choices that Dr. Duke made? And when we return, we'll continue talking about interactive writing to kind of get a little more strategically at these questions.
Thanks, Barb. So what are some ways that we can use interactive writing? We can use it to provide some direct and explicit instruction in foundational skills. We can use it to teach children how written text works, thinking about directionality, for example. We saw in the previous example how Nell Duke was prompting students about where on the page they should begin the writing. We can also use interactive writing to teach children the connections between what we write and what we read. So anytime that we engage in any specific instructional practice, it's always intentional. And part of the intention is having a specific purpose or purposes. And so we're going to offer a variety of ways that you can identify a purpose or purposes for engaging in this specific instructional practice. So first, it can be something or should be something that needs to be learned. It could be something that has already been explicitly taught and just needs reinforcement through practice and feedback. We should be using our data from formative assessment tools. Our purpose for interactive writing should also be informed by the scope and sequence of our curriculum. And obviously, we are aligning that scope and sequence. We're engaging in interactive writing that's aligned to the scope and sequence for our reading foundational skills curriculum. And it's also informed by grade level standards.
So we saw a lot of a lot of purposes in the example from Nell Duke. I think just the general purpose of having a conversation with your peers when they were talking about her partner's injured finger, and they were sort of identifying something that they all had in common. There's some social emotional learning happening there. She taught the students one part of the format of a letter. She was working on the connection between the sounds duh and and the letters that those correspond to, and really still prompting kids to focus on the sound and not the letter name. They were doing a little bit with letter formation, really focusing on that letter D. So I'm assuming that's something that has been taught in a previous lesson. Same thing with focusing on the beginning and the ending sound, the duh and the the duh and the in deer, as things beginning and ending sounds had already been taught and that middle sound had not. So a lot of really layered purposes in one single lesson.
Absolutely. This slide really shows us a variety of behaviors that we can foster through interactive writing. And you can see that the behaviors are really organized according to students or children's writing abilities, right? Like we have the pre-emergent writer, the emergent writer, and the beginning or early writer. And there are specific behaviors that interactive writing can foster within each of those categories. So we encourage you to pause if you're watching the recording and take some time to really read through these and reflect on them.
It might be interesting to make some notes about which standards each of these go back to, because they really are more details about the standards that are provided in the foundational skills standards.
Interactive writing is an intentional instructional practice that we use to serve a specific purpose or meet a specific goal. And so these are just some of the reasons why a teacher may choose to engage in interactive writing. We're working on vocabulary, on structure of a story, features of a text, oral language development, social development, building background knowledge, building specific content area knowledge, building that metacognition, and also enjoyment. We can't forget about that. This is just a reminder that we know that reading and writing are reciprocal processes. So what a student knows and is able to do as a reader influences what that same child is able to do as a writer. And so thinking about concepts about print, decoding, and encoding. So what a student knows and is able to do with oral language also influences what that child is able to do as a writer. And so we can really leverage interactive writing to help solidify some of those emergent reading skills, as well as some oral language skills and behaviors. This slide presents various ways that we can work with emergent readers in interactive writing. And so again, you can see here that it's organized kind of in a 1, 2, 3 kind of a process or setup. And again, we encourage you to pause and dig more deeply into that. This slide shows us some examples of an intentional purpose or a focus of interactive writing. And as with any instructional practice, the teacher should select the purpose based on formative assessment data about children's development as a reader or writer, the reading instructional goals that are being focused on during explicit instruction, a specific reading concept that's being focused on during reading explicit instruction. And there are several other slides that you can access in the slide deck that will present additional ways that you can use interactive writing to work with early readers, as well as intentional purposes or foci of interactive writing. So this is just a reminder that when we have transitional readers, we can see how we can support their reading development through interactive writing. So as our readers develop, as our children develop as readers, these are the kinds of things that they are experiencing there in the yellow box. And so how we can support them in their development as readers through the interactive writing practice is there in the blue box. And we can think about the same thing for our self-extending readers, moving towards that independent practice and that transfer of skills across language settings, across reading and writing settings. So we can see here that the skills for our readers are in the yellow box, and the things that we can do to support that skill development is there in the blue box. If you're accessing the slide deck, you will notice that there are many additional slides at this portion in the deck. And those hidden slides include teaching points and examples for how we can use interactive writing to support these concepts next to these dot points on this slide. So we do want to offer some cautions regarding the focus on the activity. A reminder that first and foremost, the focus is on the students, and we're always taking in that formative assessment data while we're engaging in any kind of instructional practice or instructional routine to be sure that we're meeting the needs of our students and that we're supporting their development. The instruction should change over time. It would not look the same on the first day of the school year as it does on the last day of a school year, because instruction is guided by what students need, and they need different things at different points in time over the course of a school year. So some key questions for educators to answer are, what are you noticing in small groups or one-on-one conferences? Where are the majority of the students along the continuum? What are the standards for the particular grade level that you teach? Remember that the end goal is not the activity in and of itself. The goal is to develop strategic writers who are applying writing skills, and as well as applying those reading and writing skills, foundational language, as well as the cognitive skills that they need to become proficient independent writers. So at this point, we invite you to pause the recording and again, stop and talk with some colleagues or think about these prompting questions regarding what you have heard at this point.
We'll finish up tonight by continuing to think about how interactive writing fits within a gradual release of responsibility instructional model, with the ultimate goal of transferring skills to other reading and writing events, moving towards independent reading and writing events. So as we have talked about earlier, We're starting with the teacher having a high amount of the responsibility and a high level of teacher support, moving towards the students eventually having more of the responsibility. And one thing I wanted to point out about Nell Duke's example from earlier is that she actually adjusted the amount of support she was providing to each student during the lesson. Really stood out to me that she made the little dashes to outline the letter D for a student who was struggling with that. I'm not sure if the student was having technology problems or what exactly was happening, but even within the lesson, the amount of support that's provided can be adjusted child by child. So let's watch an example from a Wisconsin classroom. These students had just read a text, I believe they're kindergartners, had just read a text called Rosie's Walk, and they previously had negotiated a retell of the story. And today they're rereading that retell and sharing the pen in the process. So let's watch part 1 of this lesson.
We've been reading Rosie's Walk. And yesterday, we retold it. And what did I do on my paper?
Write what we wanted.
I wrote down all your great words. I wrote down how you retold it. So what's our job today?
Write it.
Write it. We're going to write it on our chartboard, and you're all going to help. I'm going to start out by writing the name of the story. What was the name of our story?
Rosie's Walk.
Rosie's Walk. And I have a great resource right here. I can just copy it. And I'm going to do that to get us going. So I'm going to write Rosie's Walk. Capital R-O-S-I-E and capital W-A-L-K. And because it's the name of our story, I'm going to underline it, just like we do in our logs. Okay, our first sentence was, Rosie went for a walk. Say that sentence for me.
Rosie went for a walk.
Now quickly rehearse it so you remember it. Rosie went for a walk. Rosie went for a walk. Gabby and Morgan, we're not going to write yet. Rehearse the story. Say the story over and over. So Gabby, as a writer, you're going to say the story so we can write it. Rosie went for a walk. Rosie went for a walk. Mark her down. Awesome. Stop. Eyes up here. Okay, what is our first word, Micah? Rosie. Do you think you can come up and write it quickly? Do we have a resource? Oh, Micah, what resource do we have? And Micah, I'm going to show you something. This is Rosie's. Because we're learning about her walk. We're not going to write the apostrophe and S. We're just going to write Rosie. Thank you, Micah. Thank you. Okay, kindergartners, what's our next word?
Walk.
Rosie walk.
Went.
Let's say that word slowly. Went. What do you hear first? Find it on your ABC chart. Aram. Went. Find it. What does went mean? Awesome. What letter is that, Aram?
W.
W. Who remembers the verbal past for W?
Down, up, down, up.
Awesome. Write it on your board 3 times. I'm looking for. Awesome, Gabby. Can you come up and write it for us? Oh, I'm hearing you use the verbal past. Stop, stop, stop. What do we put between our words, honey? Can you do that? Great. Awesome. Okay, please stop. Say the word went again and listen for the last sound. Went. Went. T. What do you see on your ABC chart that begins with T?
Turtle.
Turtle. T. What's the verbal past for T?
Down.
Across. Down, across. Make some T's for me. Lucas, come up and make one in the story, please.
Down across. Down across.
Whoops, stop. Is that going to be a new word? So it's part of the word, so it's close. The letters are close together. Awesome, kiddo. You can leave it uncapped. And stop. I'm hearing many of you use your verbal path. That is awesome. That's going to help you remember how to make your letters. Very nice. Let's reread it. We need to find out what word comes next. Rosie went.
And here is the concluding part of the lesson. So let's watch that before we analyze it.
Talk to you about one thing that we did today. When we wrote Rosie, what kind of letter did we begin with? That's the name of the letter, but was it a capital letter or a little letter?
Capital.
Remember Chicka Chicka Boom Boom? All the little letters went up the coconut tree. And when they all fell, who came to get them?
The big letters.
The big letters. Those are the capital letters. So we start our names out with capital letters and we begin our sentences with capital letters. So Rosie, that's a capital R, and walk is a capital W because that's the name of the book. So that's, both of those words begin with capital letters because they're names. What kind of letter is this? What kind of R is this?
Big.
A big R or a capital. And that's because there's two reasons here. It's a name and it's the beginning of her sentence. So Rosie went for a walk. All the other letters are small letters. We only use a capital letter at the very beginning. Look at the next sentence. What does it begin with? What kind of T?
Capital T.
A capital. Okay. And then what are all the other letters? Little. Except there's a capital letter at the beginning of Rosie because that's the name. So we use capital letters for beginning of sentences and beginning of words. And we use little letters for the rest of the words.
If you are viewing the recording, we encourage you to take a pause and definitely analyze the lesson you just saw, but also think about interactive writing and shared writing in general and your practices as an educator, and a little bit about your students and the use of formative data as well.
One of the things that strikes me about those videos is, again, the importance of having common language across a system. So
Definitely.
I would assume in this system that they're all using those words capital or big, lower or small. When they talk about the writing moves for the W, down, up, down, that's something that all kindergarten teachers across the system do. We know that how important that is for our learners.
Along with special education teachers and EL teachers and interventionists. So our most vulnerable students and our students with the greatest need are hearing consistent language. So let's finish up tonight by hearing some educator, well, first let's talk about the end of the gradual release cycle, and then we'll give you some educator testimonials about shared and interactive writing. So the goal of all of our teaching is to get students towards independent application. And for For emergent writers and early level students, it could look like this, like what you see on the screen now. When it says reread for enjoyment, that means reread the co-created text. So in the kindergarten classroom that we just watched, it was just those two simple sentences. I think they said Rosie went for a walk. And then the second sentence was about a fox, and I can't remember what it said. But when we say reread the text for enjoyment, it would be just rereading that text. Students could be matching high frequency words. Maybe it's hearing the high frequency word. Maybe it's on a card or a worksheet. And the skills for independent practice can increase as the student's skill level increases. But ultimately, we want the students to transfer the skills to their independent writing. So in the case of the kindergarten lesson about Rosie's walk that we just saw, shortly after that lesson, students should be able to, I would say, use capital letters for the beginning of sentences and for the beginning of names. I taught middle school for 10 years, and there's still middle school kids who choose not to do that or don't know to do that. So it's not going to happen magically after one lesson, but it would be something that you could start to see being applied. We also saw the teacher working on spacing between words and spacing between letters. So that would be another thing that we could see students apply. These are some examples of students working together on a text and a student rereading a text with that alphabet chart right next door. And let's listen to an example of students reading a text that they co-created.
I do not like them with a cat. I do not like them with a bat.
So we see the student pointing, really working on that one-to-one correspondence at this point. There are other things that the student worked on in other parts of the lesson. You might consider having an interactive writing center in your classroom as a place where that consolidation of skills happens. In the very last video, we did see the student working on a bit on fluency. Their reading strategies and noticing print details are other possibilities. This interactive writing center might have a place to store text. Maybe that's an easel if you're storing text on chart paper. Maybe that's file folders if it's different kinds of text. There's also some uses for cut up sentences and cut up sentence strips. So storage for that might be helpful as well. And we always want to remember that the activities that are in the Interactive Writing Center or there for independent practice are things that we've already done together as a class. So they're routines and procedures that students are familiar with. And it's always something that's been taught first in whole class or small group instruction. This is just an example of a chart or poster that might go on the wall to remind students about the expectations. This is, to me, sort of the interaction between PBIS and high quality instruction, where we're really teaching the behaviors kids need to exhibit. Here's some examples of independent writing. I love this grasshopper example because it's a reminder that text doesn't just come in words or paragraphs on the page. Authors, writers use graphics with labels on them, and our young writers can do that as well. And this example on the right is a reminder that once we've done something as a class, students can then create their own versions of it. So if we've written a fairy tale together, first we've maybe read some fairy tales together, then we've written a fairy tale together, then students can write fairy tales on their own. So now's another great time to pause the recording and think specifically about independent practice and also your overall learning about shared writing. So let's finish tonight with a few testimonials from Wisconsin teachers about what interactive writing has meant for them in their classrooms.
Hi, my name is Erin Martin, and I am an elementary halftime special education teacher and halftime literacy coach here at the Beecher Dunbar Pembine School District. and I just wanted to share with you the benefits of interactive writing. I use interactive writing with my special education students as a way to truly differentiate instruction to provide individual student needs, exactly with what they need. Interactive writing is a great way to teach the foundational skills and to be able to differentiate the instruction within the intervention. I also see interactive writing used throughout the district in the different classrooms. There are many ways that you can incorporate it into your instruction. It can be done through writing about reading. You can do it during process writing. You can do it during one-on-one conferences or small group. Some of the different activities that I like to use with my students, we do word work. I love using the magnetic letters. It allows the students to manipulate words. We use a lot of cut-up sentences, which is extremely powerful for students that have language needs. But the most powerful part of interactive writing is the shared writing experience where we actually share the pen with students. This is a way to really get to know your students, but to spotlight their strengths and to build that confidence. Another benefit of it is that it really makes writing powerful and meaningful to them. We use interactive writing in a lot of different situations because we always keep in mind our audience, and that's part of the power behind the pen. We've done different things like writing letters to Santa Claus. We recently wrote Valentine's. We've co-constructed books together, made lists, lots of different ways to incorporate it. So I would encourage everyone to think about it and consider it in your instructional practices so that you too can also see the benefits.
And Kristen is a 4K teacher.
My name is Kristen Bowling. I have been teaching for the last 9 years. For 6 years, I've been teaching 4K, and prior to that, I taught kindergarten for 3 years. For the last 3 years, I've been here at Beecher Dunbar Pembine and learning my way around the workshop model. Most of my career with 4K has been using shared writing. So when we do shared writing, this year we did letter charts. So we talk about the sound that the letter makes, and then they dictate what things they know start with that letter. I do my best drawing, but I'm not an artist. And they use it later when they write in their logs, and they write the letter that we're working on and then draw a picture themselves. We've also done shared writing for nursery rhymes, where we read the nursery rhyme, we talk about the nursery rhyme, and it kind of turns into more shared reading versus writing, but it goes together because then we talk about at the end of the nursery rhyme what they think could happen next, and we write about it. This year, our fantastic reading coordinator has pushed me a little to try something outside of my box with interactive writing, and I've seen a lot of progress. We have tried a couple where we start with shared writing, and this was the week that we talked about weather, and they decided which seasons that weather you can see the weather in, and then we took that idea to a story about what the weather will be, and then wrote at the end of this story there's a question that says, what is the weather where you are today? And we did interactive writing where they came up with the sentence, we talked about the sentence, and then I had 3 students help write it. So I completed the word the. I had a student came up with the weather starts with W. So they wrote a W, and then we did the word today. And today and sunny both have capitals. We're gonna work on that. But it was something that at least we were seeing that what we're saying ties to what we're writing, and what we're writing ties to questions that were asked. And then at the end, I had one more student draw what the sentence means so that we can tie, since in 4K we do a lot more drawing than writing, which we're working on, but that what we draw should match what we're either thinking or writing or reading, and that it should match. So I've seen a lot of growth with using interactive writing, and it's something now that I'm becoming more comfortable with, and I'm very excited to continue using in the 4K world and seeing it work with those kids and how they grow as they get older in the school.
So I thank both of those teachers, as well as the teacher earlier in the video who shared her interactive writing lesson. I thank all of the teachers who have participated in the creation of these materials. This is where we've been today around interactive writing. And if I had to boil it down to just one sentence, I think my sentence would be something about intentionality. That shared and interactive writing is a time to use formative assessment data to make really intentional choices about how you spend your time with students, what you're going to model, what you're going to hand responsibility over, what are the possible roles for every single student. In that last example with the weather, we saw that one student contributed to the composition by drawing a picture. There's really space in this for every student to participate. So again, we thank you for coming live on this beautiful spring day, or watching the recording. If you're watching the recording, it was 50 degrees on March 9th when we recorded this webinar. So no matter how you joined us today, we are grateful for your presence, and most importantly, we're so grateful for everything that you do for Wisconsin's students and families and educators. You know that you can reach out to us anytime with questions, and we'd also love to hear your success stories. It's not very often that someone takes the time to call or email DPI and tell us what went well for them that day, but we love to hear that too. So thank you, and thanks especially for hanging out for this little bit of extra time tonight. And Laura and I will stay for a bit longer if you have specific questions to ask.
Thank you so much.